Chapter 5. What we should do with time. Here are 3 things we could do with time, and how well the citizens of any nation understand these 3 things determines how developed that nation becomes. Are we wasting, spending, or investing? Nations are made up of citizens. Every citizen shares equally the wealth of time that God has freely given to all nations of the world. However, not many people know exactly the essence of time and how to take advantage of it to make their nation great. The greatness of any nation is dependent on what its citizens do with their time. Being that most people do not know what to do with time to turn it into a tool for nation building, the result is that they either waste time or spend time. Only a few invest time. What does it mean to waste time? To waste time is to not convert it into a product and allow it just slip away into vanity. If any citizen of a nation wastes time, it means he gets nothing in return from his usage of time. In other words, a wasted time is of no economic value. A wasted time is any time that is not used to produce goods or render services for the good of fellow men or the nation at large. From what we've discussed in the previous sessions, it is easy to see that most Africans usually waste time. If you speak to a typical Nigerian youth about what he does with his time, you'll be amazed to find that he can hardly account for it. I will like to say here that any time that cannot be accounted for is considered a wasted time. You and I know that for most African youths, they play away or sleep away their time. Some watch movies with it, others play video games with it, or just sit idle and do nothing with time. Many others waste time on social media, admiring pictures on Instagram or chatting with friends on Facebook. We have so much time and so little to do. Strike that, reverse it. Roald Dahl. The reason Africans waste so much time is that they think they have so much time and so little to do, when in fact, we actually have only very little time to do all we need to do to transform our country into a first-world nation. Considering the amount of time we waste in Africa, it is easy to see why we are the least developed continent in the world. I believe it is obvious to you why we cannot become a developed nation if we don't stop wasting time. The citizens of great nations understand the value of time and are always adding value to their time. While a Chinese child is in the technological laboratory learning computer codes and programming, an African child would be on the street playing with sticks and sand. At the age of 12, a Chinese child would have designed a computer application, while the Nigerian child would just be happy playing computer games. A nation whose citizens know how to make productive use of time will always rule over another nation where time is lavishly wasted. To become a productive nation, we must teach every citizen to stop wasting time. We must resound the words of Bernard Berenson to their hearing and warn them not to be in the list of those who are time wasters. I could stand on a busy corner, hat in hand, and beg people to throw me all their wasted hours. Bernard Berenson. Remember that we said in the previous chapters that the value of time is equal to the value of life. That means whenever we lose time, it is actually our lives that we are losing. Hence, the life of a nation is dependent upon the value its citizens place on time. And since any time wasted cannot be gotten back, it means we actually destroy the life of our nation when we allow time to waste away. We destroy the economic life of our nation when we waste time. We destroy the political life of our nation when we waste time, and more so, we degrade and hinder the developmental growth of our nation when we waste time. What happens to a nation when the bulk of its citizens are time wasters is that the nation becomes an economically recessed nation. When a nation allows its citizens to allow time slip by without producing any value from it, that nation comes to poverty. The reason most Nigerians live on less than $2 per day is because we are a nation full of time wasters. When the leadership of a nation does not take it upon itself to instruct its citizens how to properly use time, that nation comes to self-destruction. Having said that, to waste time is to not get any returns or products from it, let's now look at what it means to spend time. When you spend time, you get little returns for it. That is to say, you get some form of compensation for it. People who spend time engage in some form of activities that has little economic value. For example, when you spend time at work, your boss pays you some salaries at the end of the month. Even if your job does not have a huge financial returns to the economy of Nigeria, you still get paid some tokens. Another way people spend time is to use it for low-yielding activities. Most of the meetings and ceremonies we organize in Nigeria are low-yielding activities in the sense that they don't have any major economic impact on the nation. They do not add to our GDP and hence do not increase our economic growth. Take for example church meetings, mosque prayer meetings, birthday parties, burial ceremonies, etc. These programs are not in themselves bad, but the amount of time spent organizing them do not directly translate into production or exports of products for national financial gains. Hence, they do not have much economic value. So, when we use most of our time to attend such meetings, we are simply spending time. However, the third thing people do with time is to invest it. When time is invested, it is converted into products. And invested time is also the time used for personal development, for learning new skills and for productivity. When time is invested, it is multiplied because it yields greater return. And invested time is any time that is used in the factories, in the laboratories, in the agricultural farms for production. And invested time is the time used for refining petroleum in the refineries and getting the products of fractional distillation. And invested time is the time used for exportation of petroleum products. And invested time is the time used for cocoa processing and exportation. And invested time is the time used by the engineer in manufacturing homemade cars for the Nigerian populace and for exportation. And invested time is the time used by the traders and manufacturers at the area international market, ABA, where all kinds of locally made products are prepared for export. And invested time is the time used by the workers in Dangote cement factories to produce cement for local and foreign use. I could go on listing more ways that time could be invested in Nigeria, but I do hope with these above-mentioned examples, you get a glimpse of what I mean by investing time. From the foregoing, any time that is used to create value either for the individual or for the nation can be regarded as invested time. It is the amount of time the citizens of a nation invest that decides how great that nation will become. When the people of any nation invest more time than they waste or spend, that nation becomes an economically robust nation. The nation whose citizens are constantly investing time will be a very productive nation. Such a nation will most likely be an exporting nation. The opposite is true when a nation is full of time wasters and time spenders. Everything comes alive in a nation when its people know how to invest their time. When a nation values and invests time, raw materials are quickly converted to finished products. A nation could be full of natural resources, but until that nation invests the wealth of time, all its natural resources will remain untapped and unharnessed, and such a nation will remain in poverty. It is only when time is invested that gold can be refined. It is only when time is invested that crude oil can be refined. It is only thanks to time well invested that food and cash crops can be processed. Time invested can bring forth all kinds of goods and services for the benefit of any nation. Hence, the most productive countries in the world are the ones with the most judicious use of time. We cannot trivialize time and hope to build a first world nation. It will not happen. The desire to build a first world nation must be turned into reality by first making sure that time is well invested to yield some high economic returns for the individual and for the nation at large. The most efficient way to truly build an economically competitive first world nation is to get every citizen of that nation to invest their time in productive activities rather than waste or just spend it. Time investment is the key to building a first world nation. The key is in not spending time, but in investing it. Stephen R. Covey. Time must be used for productive work. As important as the wealth of time is, it would be useless if it is not combined with another important gift, and that gift is the gift of work. Even though every nation has equal time in a day and has been given the gift of time to help produce a stable economy and build a first-class nation, time alone, if not mixed with the gift of work, will vanish into thin air. God was kind enough to not give us only time but also the instrumentality through which the time can be converted into whatever product we want. The instrumentality or avenue through which time is invested and converted is called work. Time and work are the two greatest assets that God has given to man. They are the greatest gifts that man has. However, there is a difference between the two gifts. The amount of time anyone has in a day is dependent on God, and it is 24 hours no matter the country of origin or residence. Man cannot add to it or subtract from it. However, the amount of work anyone does in a day is dependent on that man. Time is God-dependent, but work is man-dependent. Man can choose to increase or decrease the amount of work he does a day, but he cannot alter the amount of time he has in a day. From the foregoing, it is easy to see why some nations are first-world nations and others are third-world nations. It is not far-fetched why some nations are living in abundance while others are living in abject poverty. An understanding of time and work makes it clearer for one to understand why some countries have GDPs that are 10 times higher than those of other nations even if they got independence the same year. It is thanks to the difference in the understanding of time and work that a country like Democratic Republic of Congo with deposited mineral resources worth $24 trillion is still among the poorest and economically backward nations of the world, while Japan with little or no mineral resources is a first-world and economically developed nation. The difference in unemployment rate between any two countries is a reflection of how the citizens of those countries understand time and work. The difference in the amount of energy and resources the leaders of any two nations put into fighting the problem of unemployment is an indication of how each of these leaders understand the synergy between work and time. So, what is the synergy or relationship between work and time as it has to do with national development? The synergy or relationship between work and time is that time requires work for it to be useful. This means that without work, time is useless and vanishes into vanity. Without work, time just wastes away. Without work, time is of no value. Don't be fooled by the calendar. There are only as many days in the year as you make use of. One man gets only a week's value out of a year while another man gets a full year's value out of a week. Charles Richards. Without work, time cannot be used productively. That means to have economic productivity, work must be added to time. It is this knowledge that has separated the nations of the world into developed nations, developing nations, and underdeveloped nations. It is this knowledge of the relationship between work time and economic growth that makes some nations depend on aid from other nations in order to survive economically. So, if you are wondering why the Nigerian government is borrowing loan from the Chinese government, I guess you have a clue now. Still talking about the synergy between work and time, I want you to know that it is the combination of work and time that turn nations into first-world nations. It is the combination of work and time that doubles a nation's GDP. It is the addition of work and time that reduces the unemployment rate in any nation. It is the combination of work and time that increase the agricultural productivity of any nation. It is the combination of work and time that increases the intellectual capacity of the citizens of any nation. It is thanks to the synergy of work and time that any nation can come up with medical and scientific inventions. It is thanks to the correlation between work and time that any nation can become the highest producer and exporter of petroleum. Without a combination of work and time, no nation can be called an industrialized nation. Without a combination of work and time, no nation can become a developed nation. Almost everything you can think of that makes a nation great is dependent on work and time. That is why I said time and work are two of God's greatest gifts to man. From the foregoing, we can no longer shy away from work. It is only when we emphasize the proper use of time for work that we will be able to build a first-world nation. It is only when we begin to teach the importance of work and time to every citizen in our nation that they will understand that it is an error to waste time on non-productive activities. Let it become a common knowledge in Africa that we can only convert our huge amount of natural resources into exportable and valuable products when we combine time and work. Africa must come to a point when every citizen will know that to sit idle and do nothing meaningful with time is inactive in discipline. Determine never to be idle. No person will have occasion to complain of the want of time who never loses any. It is wonderful how much can be done if we are always doing. Thomas Jefferson. Dear friends, there is another kind of work that you can do with your time. It is a kind of work that you and I can create by ourselves. It is our own work, the kind of work that we were born for. This work I refer to here is not working for the government or a private firm, but finding out what you were born to do, what you are gifted for, and going ahead to improve yourself using the wealth of time that you have. We must all use the wealth of time we have to actualize ourselves. Every one of us is gifted for something. We were all born to contribute something to our society, and when we invest our time finding and doing that which we were born to do, we actualize ourselves. Most people who roam the streets doing nothing meaningful and those who engage in unproductive activities hardly fulfill the essence of their being. Some of them were born to start up their own companies, come up with their own inventions, start up their own schools and workshops. But because they focus too much on vanity or on government jobs, they fail to realize their destiny. You must therefore use time to fulfill your calling and live a productive life. Everyone must also be taught that they have been given the wealth of time not to waste it but to use it for productive work. Instead of wasting that time, we must now be taught to invest it in personal development. Instead of sitting down and waiting for the government to provide you with jobs, invest your wealth of time into learning new skills, new trades, and how to become a creative person. I usually tell people that every one of us can create our net worth by how well we invest in ourselves using the wealth of time that we have. Time must be used for self-development and not to sleep. Time must be used for self-development and not to party. Time must be invested into building oneself and not to roam the streets doing nothing or looking for a job. One of the best works you can do is to work on yourself. What are the talents and skills that you have? Improve on them daily by studying more, training more, and researching more on how to become the best of yourself. Find materials that could help you become the best in whatever area of life you have chosen to have influence. Is it business you want to focus on? Use the free $86,400 worth of time you have daily to learn how to become a successful and productive businessman. Invest your time into learning how other successful businessmen became successful. Learn the principles of money and how to make it work for you. Get all the necessary materials that can educate you in the area of business you have chosen. Lock yourself up in the library and voraciously consume all of them using the wealth of time that you have. If you do this for some years, you will soon realize that you don't even need to be looking for a job anymore. Instead, you will start up your own business and become a creator of jobs for others. This approach of using time for self-development will work for anyone irrespective of the area of life they have chosen to focus on. Time should be invested into personal development instead of wasting it looking for a government job. Increase your net worth, increase your skills, increase your knowledge, increase your competence using all the time that you have. Don't waste time being idle and unproductive. Fortunately for us, we have the same amount of time as any other continent in the world. The only thing we need to do now is to compete to become a continent whose nations are first world nations, where the real competition is. Let's imagine that Namibia, a country in Southwest Africa, has an equal population of people as Norway, a Scandinavian country in Europe. Assuming that both countries have 20% of their population in the working class and assuming that both countries are oil-producing nations. What do you think will happen to both countries in 5 years' time from now if both of them understand the value of work and time differently? From the previous session, I had explained that any two nation on Earth has equal amount of time in a day, that is 24 hours. God has done us universal good by giving all of us 86,400 seconds or 24 hours of time per day. God, however, does not have control over the amount of work that each man does a day. It is man's prerogative to determine how much work he does or doesn't do a day. Assuming that half of the population of the working-class citizens in Namibia refuse to work and just waste time watching movies, hanging out in the clubs and sleeping all day, while the entire working-class citizens of Norway are always at the refineries working and refining crude oil for export and local use every day for 5 years. Which of these two countries do you think will be more developed after 5 years? Which of them will have a higher GDP and a more self-sustaining economy? The answer, of course, will be Norway. Norway will build a more stable economy, a more developed nation, and have a lower rate of unemployment. While Namibia, on the other hand, will be a poor nation, with a high rate of unemployment and recessed economy. Why is that so? Even though both countries have equal 24 hours per day for 5 years, equal number of working-class citizens and the same natural resources, the outcome would be so because of the factor of work. Work is the factor that differentiates nations. The real competition between nations, therefore, is not for time but for work. All nations have equal time. It is how much of work a nation does with that time that determines how developed that nation becomes. Check nations with large labor force that are always working, you will realize that they are the best of nations in the world. Nations with higher rate of unemployment are often poor because the majority of the working class are not working with their time. That is why I don't believe that the competition between nations is in the amount of mineral resources they have. I don't also believe that the competition between nations is in their population. Of what use is a large population of lazy and unemployed people? Not much, really. I don't also believe that the competition between nations is in their geographical location. It is rather my belief that the real competition between nations is in how much they engage in productive work. The difference between any two nations or individuals is in how productive they are with their time. The common man is not concerned about the passage of time, the man of talent is driven by it. Schopenhauer. Therefore, if every African country must become a first world country, each one of them must fight to increase their workforce. Every African country that desires to become a developed country must increase her productivity. It is a battle for more work, not more mineral resources. It is a battle for more work, not for racial disposition. To truly become an economically competitive nation, Nigeria and every African nation must work. Work, and work. The kind of work that converts time into products. For that is the only way every African nation can become a first world nation. In the next chapter, we shall discuss the role of religion in building a first world nation. 1. A nation whose citizens know how to make productive use of time will always rule over another nation where time is lavishly wasted. 2. To become a productive nation, we must teach every citizen to stop wasting time. 3. The life of a nation is dependent upon the value its citizens place on time. And since any time wasted cannot be gotten back, it means we actually destroy the life of our nation when we allow time to waste away. 4. We destroy the economic life of our nation when we waste time. We destroy the political life of our nation when we waste time, and more so, we degrade and hinder the developmental growth of our nation when we waste time. 5. When a nation allows its citizens to allow time slip by without producing any value from it, that nation comes to poverty. 6. When the leadership of a nation does not take it upon itself to instruct its citizens how to properly use time, that nation comes to self-destruction. 7. Everything comes alive in a nation when its people know how to invest their time. 8. The desire to build a first world nation must be turned into reality by first making sure that time is well invested to yield some high economic returns for the individual and for the nation at large. 9. The most efficient way to truly build an economically competitive first world nation is to get every citizen of that nation to invest their time in productive activities rather than waste or just spend it. 10. A nation could be full of natural resources, but until that nation invests the wealth of time, all its natural resources will remain untapped and unharnessed, and such a nation will remain in poverty. Chapter 6. Why religion will not help. One of the trending topics recently on social media was about religion and its role on national development. The argument was whether religion has any importance as regards the development of nations. I myself have done some research on the impact of religion on the African economy using Nigeria as a case study. I will share my findings with you in this chapter. What can church attendance and prayers do? A critical look at the continent of Africa today will reveal that Africa is the least developed and poorest of the world's continents. Nigeria, being the giant of Africa, is currently facing a serious economic recession and underdevelopment. There is almost no sector of the Nigerian economy that one would turn to that he would not see the marks of continuous decay and deterioration. From education, to power, to politics, to security, to media, etc., the signs of a failed state are glaringly visible. The solution for most of my county men and women is prayers. They think that prayers and religious beliefs can deliver us from the economic decline that we've found ourselves in. Can using time for religion really help make a nation a first world nation? Is using our wealth of time for religious prayers the best option to building a first world nation? Is it possible to pray away all our national challenges? Well, before we answer these questions, I will like us to first ask ourselves if the most religious or prayerful nations in the world are the most economically developed ones, or the reverse is the case. Answering the later question first will help us better answer the former. Norway is the most developed country in the world. It is highly ranked on the list of the highly developed countries in the world by the Human Development Index (HDI) with the highest score of 0.944. Let's see if it was religious prayers that made Norway the most developed nation in the world. Studies revealed that in the early 1990s, it was estimated that between 4.7% and 5.3% of Norwegians attended church on a weekly basis. This figure has dropped to about 2%. Wait a minute, you mean only 2% of the population attends church on a weekly basis? Well, the statistics says so. It says that only 2% of Norwegians use their wealth of time in church weekly. That means the greater percentage of the population invest their time doing productive work for nation building. Little wonder they're a developed nation. What about Nigeria? It will be unfair for me not to let you know the statistics for Nigeria. A 2013 report says that Nigeria has the highest rate of church attendance in the world. The value stood at 89% squared. This means that a greater percentage of the population of Nigeria spend their time attending religious meetings instead of doing productive work. It is no surprise that we are a third world nation. From the foregoing, it is obvious that numerous religious meetings will not be able to make Nigeria a first world nation. If religious prayer meetings are the criteria for national development, Nigeria would perhaps be the most developed nation in the world, while Norway, the most underdeveloped. Therefore, answering the questions we asked earlier, I would say that the most religious or prayerful nations in the world are necessary, not the most developed ones. In fact, with Nigeria as a case study, I am tempted to say that they are perhaps the least developed ones. So why can't religion and prayers help every African nation become a first world nation? It is because prayers don't develop a nation. It is the work and productivity that do. A look at Russia, 2% church attendance, Japan, 3% church attendance, and China, 9% church attendance, attests to that fact. These are highly productive and highly workaholic nations. These are nations that value time and work and know that time must be invested into productive work if any nation must be developed. No wonder they all have a higher Human Development Index and a higher GDP than Nigeria. These nations are more prosperous than Nigeria even though they don't pray or attend church as much as Nigerians do. Why is this so? It is because they are hard-working nations. They work hard to convert their time into products and services. Nigerians, on the other hand, pray hard and work less. If we don't invest more time for productive work than we spend praying in religious meetings, we will not be able to build a developed nation. If we don't work more with our time than we go to church with it, we will continue to remain an economically recessed nation. The reason is because economic growth doesn't come to a nation because they prayed, but because they worked productively with their time. All growth depends upon activity. There is no development physically or intellectually without effort, and effort means work. Calvin Coolidge. Why won't religion help develop Africa? It is because nations are developed thanks to how much time they convert into exportable products and not because of how much time they put into religious activities. Developed nations are big on exportation, which means they use their time to produce products that are sellable to other nations. Nigeria and Africa, however, are big on religious meetings and small on exportation. They use their time to hope and pray with no products to show for it. Until we learn how to use time for hard work and productivity, we will keep having highest rate of church attendance while poverty ravages our nation. We can pray as much as we want, but prayer will not and cannot develop a nation. We must learn to respect time and use it for productive work if we are going to ever be able to compete with other nations of the world economically. I believe that you now understand that becoming a first world nation has little or nothing to do with religious prayers and everything to do with the proper use of time for hard work and productivity. To truly join the League of Developed Nations, we must downplay religion and emphasize a proper management and investment of time for efficient work. The negative effect of religion. One of the negative effects of religion as it is practiced in the modern-day Nigerian Pentecostal church is that religion teaches people that it is wrong to invest time for hard work. The majority of the religious leaders in Nigeria have been able to convince their adherents that hard work and labor is a curse and that nobody should waste their time trying to work hard. The average Nigerian Christian, if given the option to choose between using his wealth of time for attending a church meeting or going to engage in some productive labor, would actually choose church meeting over productive labor. They do not know that attending church is a low-yielding activity and as such, any time used in church is a spent time. Such time does not have any economic value. That is to say, it does not add to our GDP. And that is a very negative effect of religion on our economic growth. Religion has a negative effect on a nation's economy because religion encourages people to come to church instead of to go use time for efficient work. Religion causes people to fold their arms and waste their time waiting on miracles or favor from God to have an economically robust nation. Religion takes people from the factories where they should be converting time into products and takes them to the church and keeps them there just singing and dancing, while they add no value to the nation's growth. Religion keeps people from going to invest time at the refineries to work productively and encourages them to rather come to church for miracle services. It is a tragedy when about half of the total population of a country are waiting on God to turn their country into a first world country, without first becoming productive and hard-working people. Not only is this attitude a tragedy but also an act of greed. It is greed to pray and desire what we know we should invest time to work for. The difference between greed and ambition is a greedy person desires things he isn't prepared to work for. Habib Akand. It is a tragedy when the church tells their members to detest one of God's greatest gifts to man, the gift of work. They say that work is meant for only those who are cursed and that the believers should only wait on favor. It is a tragedy when the most popular cliché in the modern-day African church is that one day of favor is better than 10 years of labor. In other words, they are saying don't labor even if it is for 10 years. One day of favor will come that will give to you more than all that you would have labored to get for 10 years. How untrue and deceptive is this cliché? How damaging is it to our nation's economy? Less religiously active countries know that it is their responsibility to build and develop their own countries using the wealth of time that they freely have, and so they work harder than any other country just to become leading nations. But a religiously extremist nation like Nigeria runs away from their responsibility and tries to abdicate their roles to God. They complain, they cry, they pray and accuse God for the state of things in their nation as though God is to blame. They are waiting on God to come do what they ought to be doing by themselves. It is a sad reality that developed nations of the world increase their labor force and productivity, but the church in Nigeria does the exact opposite. Every weekday in Nigeria, the number of Nigerians who spend their time in church meetings without going to work productively is alarming. Some of the top Nigerian churches organize religious programs every day of the week for the whole year with the full participation of their church members, who should be at their various offices and factories working and being productive and thereby adding to our GDP and economic growth. I believe you will agree with me that we cannot build a first world nation this way. That is why I said religion will not help build the developed nation. In fact, the kind of religion practiced in Africa today kills economic growth and development. Religion as it is practiced in Africa today tells people to stay away from nation building but rather just pray for God to build the nation. That is a complete error from the preachers and pastors in Africa. It is my belief that every citizen, whether Christian, Muslim or atheist, should participate in nation building. In fact, in my opinion as a pastor, I think that Christians should even be more active and concerned about the development and transformation of the nation in which they dwell. I personally believe that every Nigerian, including Christians, have a unique responsibility to contribute to the building of their nation and to free her from all the economic challenges that she is plagued with. Every one of us must use our wealth of time for productive work and turn our nation into the most desirable nation on earth. I will like to say here that the principles for transforming Nigeria and Africa that are in this book are very effective. They have produced results and are still producing results. They are sure to produce similar results anywhere they are applied. These were the same principles that has made the church I pioneered, the Embassy of God for all nations, practically infiltrate all the stratum of the Ukrainian nation, such that Christians from our churches are some of the most influential personalities in the nation of Ukraine today. For real, Christians from our church have become the major force that have driven the transformation of Ukraine and are still driving her transformation today. Many of these Christians have gone ahead to occupy positions in government and all social spheres of the nation, which has contributed to a radical development of this nation. This they did by understanding how to convert time into products for economic gain and national prosperity. It is for the above reasons that I believe that these principles can work for Nigeria also if the churches decide to adopt it instead of telling Christians to just pray and do nothing productive with their time. Another negative effect of religion on the growth and development of Nigeria and Africa has to do with religious crisis and violence. There has been serious religious unrest in various northern states of Nigeria for some years now. Muslims killing Christians, bombing churches and burning down houses. There is no way economic activities can proceed in such war zones, and hence time is viciously squandered in such war zones. No foreign or locally owned companies would like to be situated in a war-prone zone. In fact, wherever there is religious crisis, companies fold up, and factories are shut down, and every form of productivity and work is brought to a halt. So, religious intolerance leads to time wastage, religious crisis leads to economic crash. Religious extremism leads to unemployment and poverty. It is my opinion that if we want to become a first world nation, we must downplay religion as it is being practiced today. We must elevate time investment for hard work above favor. We must de-emphasize numerous church programs that takes the bulk of our time and invest those times for economic research programs, medical and technological research programs. If we can get more people to work than to church, we will yield higher economic returns and our time would be used for more productive work. Hence, I encourage you to stay away from any church that tells you not to invest your time to work. You should walk away from any church that tells you that work is a curse. Don't believe any pastor who tells you that one day of favor is better than 10 years of labor. Labor or work is God's precious gift to man, and it is how we apply it to time that decides how fast our nation will develop. How religion destroys industrialization. As you would have probably already known, Nigeria has more church buildings than factories and companies, even more than schools. There is at least one or more churches on almost every street in Nigeria. The richest pastors in the world are in Nigeria, and do you know what they are building with their monies? They are not building large factories that can employ millions of people. They are not building multinational companies to reduce the unemployment rate. They are not even thinking of industrializing the nation. They are not thinking of how to bring economic development to the nation. They are only thinking of church, and hence are building more church auditoriums. You and I already know that the time spent in church meetings do not have any economic gain for the nation. Nigeria has some of the largest church auditoriums in the world today. It is popularly acclaimed that the Redeem Camp building is the world's largest Christian auditorium. It is said to accommodate more than 1 million people. Reporters say that it costs $60 million to complete this building. The Redeemed Church is currently constructing another auditorium that will accommodate about 12 million people in a single gathering, cubed. Another large auditorium is the Faith Tabernacle of Winners Chapel. Its seating capacity is about 50,000 people. They are currently building another 100,000 seating capacity auditorium, to the power of 4. The Salvation Ministries is also constructing a 90,000-seater capacity auditorium. The Dunamis International Gospel Center is building a 75,000-seater capacity auditorium. The Mountain of Fire and Miracles Ministries (MFM) is also currently building a 500,000-seater capacity auditorium. Now the question I want you to ask yourself is, what will be the effect of all these large auditoriums on the economy of Nigeria? The answer to that question is that they will destroy the economic growth of the nation. Why? It is because they will take the people who are supposed to make up our labor force and who should be converting time in the industries and factories, and lock them up every week in those buildings, just spending time praying, singing and dancing while the nation suffer economic recession. Imagine how many people will be withdrawn from their offices and workshops every day once these buildings are completed, all in the name of religion. Let's do the maths together. 12 million people plus 100,000 people plus a 90,000 people plus a 75,000 people plus a 500,000 people. That will be equal to 12,765,000. 12,765,000 people gathering in church buildings almost every day only from these auditoriums. What are they doing with their wealth of time? Spending it on religious activities instead of investing it in productive work. We are aware that there are churches on every street in Nigeria, so we know that millions of Nigerians gather in churches for meetings weekly. But assuming we are working with just the statistics from these above-mentioned auditoriums, and if we assume that a Nigerian worker makes $10 an hour as we did in Chapter 1 of this book, that means that if the 12,765,000 people stay in those auditoriums praying and singing for 1 hour when they should be at their workplaces working, the country loses $127,650,000, $127,650,000 per hour. But you and I know that most Nigerian church services lasts for about 5 hours. Hence, if we multiply the above money by 5, we will be losing $638, $250,000 for every 5 hours those number of people spend in church instead of at work. And of course, if this meetings happen 5 times a week, we will lose more than $3 billion in a week. Now tell me why our economy will not be crippled. Tell me how our nation will be developed when the people who should be in the industrial sectors, in the factories and in the workshops working and producing exportable products with their time for the good of the nation, are gathered in some religious meetings that are of no economic value to the nation. What about if the $60 million used to build the largest church auditorium was used to build a factory instead? That can employ as many people as the seating capacity of that auditorium. What about if all the big auditoriums we mentioned above were actually factories? Workshops and companies where unemployed Nigerians can invest their time for efficient work and produce exportable goods and products of economic values. Wouldn't we eradicate unemployment and economic recession from our nation? Wouldn't we become an industrialized nation? I have even heard stories where Nigerian pastors discouraged their members from building multinational businesses, factories and companies, and convinced them to bring their intended capital to church as tithe and seed offerings so as to get more blessings from God. In this way, many factories, industries and businesses have been buried and replaced with big church auditoriums. So, instead of building economically productive structures, time and monies are wasted to build churches. Instead of building factories where people can invest time on productive activities that will generate wages for the Nigerian masses, we build large auditoriums to prevent people from investing time for work and productivity. It is for these reasons and many others that I said religion destroys industrialization and will not help in making Nigeria and every African country a first world nation. When the Europeans, Chinese, and Japanese are building technological factories all over their countries and raising an industrial force to boost time investment for productivity and economic growth, Nigerians are only building prayer centers and church auditoriums. First world nations don't waste their resources in building large church auditoriums, they build hospitals, schools, and factories. Because they know that religious activities are of little or no economic value to any nation. Developed nations raise industrialists, inventors, doctors and business entrepreneurs who know how to use time productively, but it is unfortunate that the only people that are raised by our churches are pastors and prayer warriors. There is no way we will be able to compete with the nations of the world if we don't focus more on the use of time for industrialization than we do on church buildings. I believe that it is clear from this session that religion as it is practiced in Africa today encourages time wastage and it such impedes economic growth and national development. It is not being used as a tool for building a first world nation. In the next chapter, we shall discuss how developed nations use time. 1. If religious prayer meetings are the criteria for national development, Nigeria would perhaps be the most developed nation in the world while Norway, the most underdeveloped. 2. If we don't invest more time for productive work than we spend praying in religious meetings, we will not be able to build a developed nation. 3. If we don't work more with our time than we go to church with it, we will continue to remain an economically recessed nation. 4. Nations are developed thanks to how much time they convert into exportable products and not because of how much time they put into religious activities. 5. Until we learn how to use time for hard work and productivity, we will keep having highest rate of church attendance while poverty ravages our nation. 6. We can pray as much as we want, but prayer will not and cannot develop a nation. We must learn to respect time and use it for productive work if we are going to ever be able to compete with other nations of the world economically. 7. Becoming a first world nation has little or nothing to do with religious prayers and everything to do with the proper use of time for hard work and productivity. 8. To truly join the League of Developed Nations, we must downplay religion and emphasize a proper management and investment of time for efficient work. 9. Religion has a negative effect on a nation's economy because religion encourages people to come to church instead of to go use time for efficient work. 10. Religion takes people from the factories where they should be converting time into products and takes them to the church and keeps them there just singing and dancing, while they add no value to the nation's growth. 11. Religion keeps people from going to invest time at the refineries to work productively and encourages them to rather come to church for miracle services. 12. It is a tragedy when about half of the total population of a country are waiting on God to turn their country into a first world country, without first becoming productive and hard-working people. Chapter 7. How developed nations use time. It has been my observation that most successful people get ahead during the time that others waste. Henry Ford. He quote above could not have been said better. It is a fact and a common knowledge in life that any two persons who start life, school or university at the same time do not end up getting the same amount of success and achievement in life. One often becomes a mediocre or a failure while the other becomes very successful. The reason for this difference between people is not far-fetched. It is simply a function of what each person does with his time. While some people are wasting time, others are investing time, and before you realize it, the investors are already ahead of the wasters. This is true for everyone. More importantly for me is that this is also true for nations. Some nations get ahead during the time that others waste. That is what this chapter will be about. I am going to show you the secret to getting ahead of others. How first world nations get ahead of the rest. In the second chapter of this book, we discussed the concept of African time, or Black people's time as the Europeans and Americans call it. Whenever they refer to African time as Black people's time, it is actually to mock us. Why are they mocking us? It is because they understand that the time we waste to vanity is the same treasure with which they build their economy and develop their nations. The citizens of the first world nations know that while we may freely waste 1 hour of time or $10 as we earlier stated in previous chapters to vanity, they on the other hand dare not waste time or practice African time. The first world nations have respect for time and understand its value. And that is the secret to their getting ahead of the third world nations. Just recently, a British member of the House of Lords quit his government post after turning up late to answer questions, saying he was thoroughly ashamed of himself. Lord Bates, a junior minister in the UK Department for International Development, stunned colleagues when he announced he missed a question from Baroness Lister of Berterset in Parliament's upper chamber. In his words he said, "I'm thoroughly ashamed at not being in my place, and therefore I shall be offering my resignation to the Prime Minister with immediate effect. I do apologize." His resignation was refused as it was judged this was unnecessary, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Theresa May said. As a hard-working and diligent minister, it is typical of his approach that he takes his responsibilities to Parliament so seriously. Dear friends, why do you think Lord Bates tendered his resignation after coming few minutes late to Parliament? It is because of the respect he has for time. He knew that it was wrong for him to not be at work when he should. It is this respect, knowledge and understanding of time that sets nations apart. The nations that have gotten ahead of others are those that have best invested their time into building their nations. The first world nations got ahead of the rest of the world by investing their time into building factories, industries, hospitals, workshops, laboratories, refineries, technical colleges, inventions, etc. While the rest of the world was sleeping, playing and wasting time to vanity. Those countries that waste time building church auditoriums while their nations suffer economic recession are the ones that become third world nations. If Nigeria and Africa want to get ahead of other nations and continents of the world, then we must invest more time and show more respect and value for time than those nations we wish to be ahead of. To get ahead of other nations, we must invest more time at the laboratories and libraries than those nations do. To get ahead of any nation, we must invest more time at the factories working and being productive than that nation does. The secret to getting ahead of any nation is to be a more industrialized nation than that nation. If Africa and Nigeria must become the envy of the world, we must invest more time into export than import. The secret to getting ahead of other nations is to first teach all our citizens to be productive with their time, and that it is a sin against the nation and its economic growth to waste precious time on non-productive activities. So, it is thanks to how first world nations use time that they are ahead of us today. If we want to become first world nations, we must also learn the value of time and how to use it for productive work. The work ethics of first world nations. Mark Cuban was right when he said, "Work like there is someone working 24 hours a day to take it all away from you." The above statement is one of the secrets to becoming a first world nation. And not only that, it is also the secret to becoming an excellent and a productive individual. We live in a very competitive world. Everyone is fighting for relevance. Nations are fighting to become world's most powerful and most economically developed nations. Various countries are looking for more innovative ways to building the largest economy in the world. It is for these reasons that Africa and Nigeria must awaken out of slumber and work like other nations are working 24 hours a day to take it all away from us. We must use time to work now as if the developed nations of the world are working to keep us in perpetual underdevelopment and economic recession. We must work now like people who are ready to erase the popular belief that Africa is the poorest continent in the world. To arise from being a dark continent to becoming the most developed continent in the world, Africa must begin to invest more time into productive work. We must of necessity begin to place value on time. We must get to the point when every second, minute and hour has some monetary or economic value. That is how developed nations use time. They get monetary value for it. For example, in the US you have to make money, otherwise you are nobody. If you have 40 years of earning capacity and you want to make $4 million, which means $100,000 per annum, you can achieve this in 250 working days. That comes to $400 a day or $50 an hour. With this orientation, Americans can say that their time costs $50 an hour. Americans also talk about wasting, spending and saving time squared. The average African citizen does not know how much his 1 hour costs. And when the value of a thing is not known, abuse is inevitable. Little wonder people spend close to 6 hours of their time every day watching African magic movies, chatting on social media, playing Candy Crush and sleeping, while their counterparts in developed countries are in the laboratories and workshops working out new technologies. It is a known fact that the largest national economy in the world is in the United States, and this is thanks to the high level of understanding of the value of time and its use for productivity and hard work by the American citizens. Owning an abundant deposits of natural resources, the United States is one of the largest manufacturers and exporters of various kinds of products in the whole world. As one would expect, this high level of productivity and industrialization makes it possible for a majority of the American people to live an economically prosperous life. The percentage of those who are poor in this country is estimated to be 14.5% of the whole population, cubed. This is as a result of their work ethics and respect for time. That is a major difference between Nigeria, or Africa, and the United States of America. We are also blessed with an abundant deposits of natural resources, but our lack of a productive work ethics and our disrespect for time is the limiting factor for which we are still an economically poor continent. It is our failure to invest time for the industrialization of our continent that has kept us in such a state where we have to be perpetually dependent on America and other first world nations for aid and humanitarian services. There is really nothing special about America that we lack as a continent except the way and manner in which the citizens of America use time. The average American understands the need for time investment and work. Being imbued with the Protestant work ethic, they equate working time with success. The more productive work you do, the more hours, that is, the more successful you will be and the more money you will make. This idea makes perfect sense to American ears to the power of 4. Dear friends, it is this secret that I have been trying to reveal to you from the beginning of this book. The fastest way to turn any African nation into a first world nation is to open up this secret to the citizens of that nation. The secret is the more productive work you do, the more successful you become. That is to say, the more hours you work, the more money you make. This is true for both individuals and nations. If we could get our citizens to convert their time doing more work, we will be more productive, and the more productive we become, the more economically prosperous nation we become. Every African country can become an industrial hub if we could learn to use time productively like the first world nations do. It doesn't matter what nation exactly we refer to, as long as that nation understands the importance of time and work, we can learn their work ethics. The Americans are not the only ones who understand the need to invest time into productive work. Other developed nations like Switzerland, China and Germany has made it a way of life to always respect time and use it only for productive work. These countries, together with others like Britain, the Netherlands, Austria and Norway, understand that action or work must be applied to time. They, just like the Americans, do not afford the luxury of a wasted time by allowing it slip into vanity without seizing it and converting it into products and services that lead to the growth and development of any nation. All these nations are well knowledgeable in the fact that a wasted time is gone forever and cannot be reversed. Lost wealth may be replaced by industry, lost knowledge by study, lost health by temperance or medicine, but lost time is gone forever. Samuel smiles. The Protestant work ethics. Dear friends, having said much about the work ethics of the first world nations, I think it is expedient for me to explain at this point how most of the developed nations of the world got their work ethics. In his book, The Protestant Work Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism, Max Weber wrote that capitalism in Northern Europe evolved when the Protestant, particularly Calvinist, ethic influenced large numbers of people to engage in work in the secular world, developing their own enterprises and engaging in trade and the accumulation of wealth for investment. In other words, the Protestant work ethics was an important force behind the unplanned and coordinated emergence of modern capitalism. America and most European nations hold their industrialization and development to the Protestant Reformation that started in the year 1517. It was thanks to the Protestant Reformation that the importance of using time for productive work became popular in most of Europe and America. The Reformation brought with it the spirit of capitalism, that is a set of values, the spirit of hard work and progress. The Reformation profoundly affected the view of work. So much so that even the most mundane professions were dignified and seen as avenues of adding to economic growth and development for the common good of man, to the power of 5. Why did I share this exposition with you on the Protestant work ethics? It is because Nigeria claims to have about 37.7% of its population affiliated with Protestantism. That is about 60 million people who profess Protestant Christianity. Yet I don't seem to see the positive effect of Protestantism on the Nigerian economy. One would have thought that the about 60 million Protestant Christians in Nigeria would have turned the country into an economic world power by simply applying the Protestant work ethics of using time for dignified labor. But that, as it is, can only be a wish considering the current state of the Nigerian economy. The present reality is that we are an economically recessed and a poverty-stricken nation. Could it be that we are practicing a different kind of Protestantism from that which the first world nations practiced? Where is the spirit of capitalism, that spirit of hard work, progress, industrialization and development that changed most of Europe and America? The American work ethic is something to be admired. Our workforce, regardless of position, works hard to produce the best product and serve customers to the best of their ability. Leonard Boswell. Weber himself argued in his writings that societies having more Protestants are those that have a more developed capitalist economy. But the reverse is the case for Nigeria and most of Africa. Something has to be wrong with the way church is being done in the modern-day Nigeria. As we discussed in the previous chapter, the current form of religion that is practiced in Nigeria today cannot turn our nation into a first-world nation. And I believe the reasons are obvious now. We are actually practicing a kind of religion that is anti-Protestantism. Our pastors today have introduced a religion that discourages the Protestant work ethic of investing time for productive work. The Protestant work ethic says every man must invest their time to work and labor hard so as to contribute to economic growth. But our pastors say it is useless to invest time to work since work is a curse. They say, one day of favor is better than 1,000 years of labor. The Protestant work ethic says people must go out of the church to engage in secular jobs. Our pastors say people must only remain in the church and become pastors, ushers or choir directors. The Protestant work ethics encourages the use of time for productivity and creativity. Our pastors encourage the spending of time for prayers, fasting, and dependence on God for everything. The Protestant work ethics encourages individuals to build factories, schools, hospitals, libraries, etc., where time could be converted for productivity. Our pastors encourage people to only build large church auditoriums where time could be wasted and spent. The Protestant work ethics teaches people how to become financially independent by investing in small, medium, and large-scale businesses. Our pastors teach people to bring their monies to church as tithe offerings and prophetic seeds and hope on God for survival. The Protestant work ethics taught people how to live a humble, modest life. Our pastors teach people how to live an extravagant, wasteful, and luxurious life. The Protestant work ethics taught that every man must work hard to build and develop his society and nation. Our pastors are teaching that God is responsible for the building and development of a nation, and that we should while away time waiting for Him to come develop our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you will agree with me now that the Nigerian religious system needs a total overhauling. We must return to the foundational teachings of the Protestant Reformation if we must build a first world nation. We must urgently start practicing the Protestant work ethics if we really want to become a developed nation. Hard work, respect for time, and productivity must become the prevailing messages in our pulpits. To become a developed nation, we must start encouraging our citizens to invest time to get into businesses, build factories, schools, hospitals, and participate in the process of production, and by so doing contribute to economic growth and national development. It is my belief that if the proper use of time and the Protestant work ethics developed Europe and America, they can also develop Nigeria and Africa at large. In the next chapter, we shall discuss how to become an economically competitive nation. 1. The nations that have gotten ahead of others are those that have best invested their time into building their nations. The first world nations got ahead of the rest of the world by investing their time into building factories, industries, hospitals, workshops, laboratories, refineries, technical colleges, inventions, etc., while the rest of the world was sleeping, playing, and wasting time to vanity. 2. If Nigeria and Africa want to get ahead of other nations and continents of the world, then we must invest more time and show more respect and value for time than those nations we wish to be ahead of. 3. To get ahead of other nations, we must invest more time at the laboratories and libraries than those nations do. To get ahead of any nation, we must invest more time at the factories working and being productive than that nation does. 4. The secret to getting ahead of other nations is to first teach all our citizens to be productive with their time, and that it is a sin against the nation and its economic growth to waste precious time on non-productive activities. 5. To arise from being a dark continent to becoming the most developed continent in the world, Africa must begin to invest more time into productive work. 6. We are blessed with an abundant deposits of natural resources, but our lack of a productive work ethics and our disrespect for time is the limiting factor for which we are still an economically poor continent. 7. It is our failure to invest time for the industrialization of our continent that has kept us in such a state where we have to be perpetually dependent on America and other first world nations for aid and humanitarian services. 8. If we could get our citizens to convert their time doing more work, we will be more productive, and the more productive we become, the more economically prosperous nation we become. 9. Hard work, respect for time, and productivity must become the prevailing messages in our pulpits if we are ever going to become a first world nation. 10. To become a developed nation, we must start encouraging our citizens to invest time to get into businesses, build factories, schools, hospitals, and participate in the process of production, and by so doing contribute to economic growth and national development. Chapter 8. How to become an economically competitive nation. One of the secrets to the greatness of America as a nation is the ability to build a sustainable and stable economy. From the time of the Industrial Revolution till date, America has been able to remain an economically competitive nation. When other nations of the world want to measure the strength and rate of their economic development and growth, they measure it against that of America. In other words, they make America the standard. Hence, every nation of the world is trying to match up to America. Every one of them want to compete with America. So why is America an economically competitive nation? Why are they the standard of measurement of economic growth and development? Why is Nigeria not the standard? Why is Africa not the standard? This is what we shall be discussing in this chapter. The chapter answers the question of how every African nation can become an economically competitive nation. God will not do it. Nigerians sincerely desire that their nation become an economically competitive nation and want to be envied. However, most Nigerians do not know how to turn that desire into reality. Therefore, in an attempt to bring those desires to pass, the majority of citizens resort to prayers. They attend church prayer meetings just to pray for the development of Nigeria. As sincere as their intentions are, God has not come down to do their plea. The nation is still suffering from economic recession and poverty. It is not as if God is not interested in the economic prosperity of Nigeria, but that He has a principle with which nations are developed. That principle has little or nothing to do with prayers. A look at the Bible will make it clear that God is interested in the economic growth of nations, but He, however, doesn't come down to do for humans what they should do for themselves. Perhaps we could learn that lesson from ancient Egypt. Bible history has it that ancient Egypt once faced a famine, an economic recession and poverty. However, before the famine, God showed Pharaoh the king in a dream what would happen. He, however, did not understand the dream until Joseph was called to interpret the dream. From Joseph's interpretation, it was revealed that there was going to be 7 years of abundance that will be followed by another 7 years of famine, hunger and economic recession. Joseph, by divine wisdom, advised the king that the 7 years of abundance and productivity should be used to produce more than enough food for storage against the 7 years of famine. That was exactly what the king and the people of Egypt did. However, there is something striking about the story that I would like to draw your attention to. Let's look at the Bible verses below to ascertain it. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Genesis chapter 41 verses 47 to 49 Niv. From the 47th verse, you will realize that the land produced plentifully. The question that should come to mind is, how did the land produce plentifully? Did God send angels to till the ground? Did the land cultivate itself? Or was it the Egyptians themselves who worked hard to till the ground? It is my belief that the land produced plentifully because the people increased their efforts in tilling and cultivating the land. The people engaged more in productive work. They invested more time and energy on agriculture. They possibly employed more people to work on the land. I will like to picture a scenario in which for 7 years, no citizen of working age was allowed to waste time on frivolities and on non-productive activities. I will also like to imagine an Egyptian nation in which the people were forced to work extra hours, so much so that they produced a lot of grains like the sand of sea. That is my suggestion to my nation, to increase productivity, to increase working force and working time, and to learn to save and invest for days of famine. We do not have to wait for God to come down and warn us about an impending famine or economic recession. We should till the land as if the next 7 years will be plagued with lack. We should work as if there is an impending world economic crisis. If we fail to use our time for productive work, there will be nothing God can do to help us even if we pray non-stop for one whole year. When we finish praying, we will still need to get to work and invest time into tilling the land. If we refuse to convert time into products by engaging in productive work, God will keep back His blessings to Himself. If we refuse to invest time into tilling our land, God will withhold all His provisions to Himself. What was the result of the wisdom of Joseph on the Egyptian economy? What was the economic benefits of such use of time for hard work and productivity by the Egyptian people? The Bible had this to say about that. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. Genesis chapter 41 verses 56 to 57 If the economic benefit for the 7 years of productivity in Egypt was that the nation became an economic power. Egypt became the succor for other nations when the famine became so severe. The verses above shows us that all the world came to Egypt to buy grain. Can you imagine how rich Egypt would become? Just imagine how much their GDP will increase. While other nations will be getting poorer during the famine, Egypt will be getting richer. That is how to become an economically competitive nation. If Nigeria could learn from ancient Egypt, we would soon become an economic power. If we could invest the next 7 years of our time into productive work in the area of agriculture. If we as a nation could invest the next 7 years of our time into building our petroleum industry and refining our crude oil effectively, we would become an economically competitive nation sooner than we think. The same result will be gotten if our wealth of time is purposefully invested in the aviation sector, the educational sector, and the science and technology sector, and so on. So, God will not do it for us. We ought to teach people that they are supposed to use their wealth of time to work hard, till their land, and to contribute to the economic prosperity of their nation. God has done His part by giving us the wealth of time, the lands and other natural resources. He has also given us an example in ancient Egypt to learn from. So, instead of just praying to God again for economic prosperity, let's take responsibility and build a nation that will become an economic hub for other nations of the world to look up to. It is possible to build an economically competitive nation. All we need to do is pay attention to the 5 steps below. 5 ways to build an economically competitive nation. There are a few steps to building a world-class economy. These steps or requirements have properly been met by the nations of the first world, hence their economic prosperity. If Nigeria and Africa wish to become first world nations, we must of necessity meet these criteria. 1. We must value time. 2. We must value work. 3. We must build factories more than we build churches. 4. We must export more than we import. 5. We must harness our natural resources. 1. We must value time. I have spent the last few chapters telling you how much of time we waste in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. Despite that, Nigeria is still the 26th largest economy in the world. My fellow Nigerians, can you imagine that we were able to build the 26th largest economy in the world without the right attitude to time? What a colossal amount of resources we are not yet tapping into in our quest for development. What do you think will happen if we begin to value time like the Japanese do or like the Americans do? Just this quality of right attitude to time could perform wonders for our economy. If every citizen of our country begins to value time and use it mainly for productive purposes, we would soon become an economically great nation. 5. Until you value yourself, you will not value your time. Until you value your time, you will not do anything with it. M. Scott Peck. If we bring that to play together with the fight against corruption, we could build one of the greatest nations on earth. 2. We must value work. Most times in Nigeria, people tend to pray to God for the development of the nation, especially those who belong to the Pentecostal churches. They pray for miracles to solve the economic problems that we are faced with. However, I believe you already know that nations don't get developed by miracles. All the developed nations we've discussed in this book didn't get developed by miracles. They all worked hard to develop their nations. In other words, building an economically developed nation requires work. The kind of work that converts time into products. If we must bring about economic development in Nigeria and Africa, we must teach people the value of using time for productive work. Work hard, and you will have a lot of food. Waste time, and you will have a lot of trouble. Proverbs chapter 28 verse 19. From the Bible verse above, we could see two of God's blessings to man, work and time. As I have already said in the previous sessions, work and time are the two greatest wealth God has given to you. Any nation that understands and uses judiciously these two wealth, time and work, will eventually become an economically prosperous nation. That is why the verse says, if you work hard, you will have a lot of food. That is to say, you will have a robust economy, a high GDP, and abundant food supply in a developed nation. That is the secret of developed nations. Hence, if Africa wants to have a self-sustaining economy, it must of necessity value work and make hard work a way of life for its citizens. The second part of the verse says if you waste time you will have troubles, economic troubles and poverty. It is easy to see why Nigeria and Africa are poor and full of troubles. It is simply because of the amount of time we waste in our nations instead of working. God has already given us the secret. If we must become economically competitive, we must work hard and stop wasting time on non-productive activities. 3. We must build factories more than we build churches. The amount of time given to manufacturing activities in any nation determines to a large extent how large the economy of that nation will be. In first world countries, there are numerous number of factories and manufacturing companies. Statistics about the world's manufacturing output in 2015 revealed that 1. Chinese manufacturing output was the highest in the world, $2 trillion. 2. USA manufacturing output totaled $1.9 trillion, the second highest in the world. 3. The UK's manufacturing output was $244 billion, the ninth highest in the world. 1. Dear friends, it is easy to see from the statistics above why China, USA and UK are among the world-leading economies today. The reason is simply because of the number of factories and manufacturing activities that go on in these nations. It will be impossible for any nation to become a first world nation if it does not use its wealth of time to engage in manufacturing activities. A nation that manufactures nothing will have nothing for its own consumption, let alone to export to other nations, and such a nation will remain a poor nation. A nation that manufactures nothing will have the majority of its citizens unemployed. But the nation that invests time into manufacturing and industry will have more than enough food and products for its own consumption and for exportation. More so, such a nation with high manufacturing capacity will have a lower rate of unemployment. It is, however, unfortunate that Nigerians would rather use their time to build church auditoriums than build factories and manufacturing companies. It is not as if it is wrong to build churches, but if we are going to become a first world nation, we must build more factories than we build churches. If we are going to become an economically competitive nation, we must use more time for manufacturing activities than we use it for church activities. 4. We must export more than we import. One of the most important things a nation needs to do with time in order to become an economically competitive nation is to convert it to exportable products. The economic development of any nation is proportional to its exporting capacity. A careful study of most of the developed nations of the world will reveal that they are developed thanks to how much they produce and export to other nations. In 2016, China was by far the world's leading exporter, exporting goods valued in a total of $1,990 billion, $1,990 billion in the year. Why won't China be a first world nation? In second place is the USA. The United States exported goods valued at $1,456 billion, $1,456 billion that same year. It is not a surprise that the United States is also a first world nation. Third on the list of the world's top exporters is Germany, which is also home to one of the world's largest economies. In 2016, the goods exported from Germany had a value of around $1.5 trillion. Like the United States, Germany also has an extremely busy manufacturing sector. The most commonly exported goods from Germany include automobiles, machinery, chemicals, electronics, electrical equipment, and pharmaceuticals. Squared. Dear friends, where do exportable products like cars, machinery, electrical equipment, etc. come from? They are all products of converted time. The amount of time a country converts determines the amount of exportable products that it will have. Why is Nigeria not an economically robust nation? The reasons are not far-fetched. In 2015, Nigeria exported products worth $47.8 billion, making it the 49th largest exporter in the world. From this statistics, you could see the difference between how much America, China and Germany makes from export compared to what Nigeria makes. That is a proof that those nations mentioned above are more judicious with time than Nigeria is. If Nigeria, being the giant of Africa, is still on the 49th position of exporter, what would the statistics be for other African nations? It would be a humiliating figure. It behoves on us now to work hard to become more of an exporting nation than an importing one if we must become economically competitive. 5. We must harness our natural resources. I already stated in previous sessions of this book the need for Africa to harness her natural resources. There are abundant natural resources in Africa that, if properly harnessed, could turn Africa into an economic power. However, all of these resources are buried in the ground and time and work is required to process and harness them for economic gains. It is because we are a continent that detests hard work and waste time that we are still poor despite all our natural resources. We have simply refused to till our lands to enjoy the blessings and wealth that God has deposited therein for us. We are rather praying to God every day for His blessings, whereas He has already blessed us. All we need to do is to harness the resources in our lands and the blessings will become visible. That is why God gave us the gift of work. It is only through the conversion of time by working that all natural resources can be converted into economic blessings for a nation. Natural resources themselves will amount to nothing if we don't work on them to process and convert them into economic gains for our nations. Even though God has given us abundant natural resources, we will still remain a poor continent if there are no people who are willing to invest their time into working on these resources. Why will Africa remain poor if no one works on her natural resources? It is because as long as there is no man to use the wealth of time for productive work, God will not give us economic prosperity. Whenever the people of a nation are too lazy to work, God withholds their blessings. When the citizens of a nation to whom God has given abundant resources fold their arms and refuse to invest their time to harness those resources, they deprive themselves of the benefits and blessings that are buried within those resources. Such a nation will not be any better than another nation that is completely void of natural resources. That is why Japan, with no natural resources, is an economically competitive nation, while Nigeria, with all the resources, are struggling to come out of economic recession. The reason is because whenever there are no men to labor, heaven withholds blessings. All our natural resources can become our greatest source of economic wealth if we could just learn how to invest time to process and harness them. We need to revise our economic thinking to give full value to our natural resources. This revised economics will stabilize both the theory and the practice of free market capitalism. It will provide business and public policy with a powerful new tool for economic development, profitability, and the promotion of the public good. Paul Hawken. We would be richer than USA, China and Germany if we just focus on our natural resources and use time wisely to turn them into our source of national prosperity. Stop wasting time looking for a job. It is a common knowledge that most Nigerian youths are unemployed and are roaming the streets every day just wasting time. The reason for that problem is the fact that our educational system has not taught our citizens how to invest time into learning skills and know-hows, as we discussed in the session on human capital development in Chapter 4 of this book. In order to solve that problem, I want to challenge all Nigerian youths to stop wasting their time looking for a government job. It is true that so much time have already been wasted in some schools and universities with no professional skills to show for it. However, the future is still in our hands. We all still have the wealth of 24 hours of time every day. We can convert that time into self-development instead of wasting it on the streets looking for jobs. It is expedient to note that one secret to becoming a first world nation is for every citizen to use the wealth of time that they have to invest in themselves and build skills, talents, competence, and creativity. That is why you see most developed nations full of inventors, highly skilled and talented people, and very proficient business people. The reason is that in developed nations, people hardly waste their time waiting on the government to provide jobs for them. They rather invest their time to develop their passion, skills, talents, and area of interest. That is what every Nigerian youth should be doing with the wealth of time that we have been blessed with. Can you imagine if Mark Zuckerberg wasted his time looking for a government job? There would be no Facebook today, and all the people working with Facebook.com would probably still be wasting their time looking for government jobs. Instead of wasting time, he invested it in himself by using it to learn the technology required to invent Facebook. What about Bill Gates? He did the same thing. He invested time to learn about how to invent Microsoft instead of roaming the streets every day looking for a government job. Today, Microsoft is one of the leading employers of labor in the world. Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, by investing time properly, were able to learn new skills and build their human capacity, and today they are adding to their country's GDP and economic growth instead of lamenting the lack of government jobs. Let's imagine that the 18.8% of our population that are unemployed and the estimated 75 million illiterates that are idling away their time in non-productive activities actually invest that wealth of time into learning how to invent, how to start up their own businesses, and how to become skillful and competent in various aspects of life. What do you think will happen to our nation? There would be an increase in the number of businesses, companies, inventions, factories, and technological know-hows in every nook and cranny of the nation. And when that happens, there will be an increase in productivity, a decrease in unemployment, and an increase in our GDP and economic growth. We would therefore, sooner or later, become an economically competitive nation and a first world nation. Therefore, my friends, instead of wasting time looking for a job, use time for self-development and you will become an employer of labor sooner or later. In concluding this chapter, I will encourage you to pay attention to the points that have been discussed here. There is a high possibility for Nigeria and every African nation to become economically rich nations. This is because we have been blessed abundantly by God. The only thing we need to do is to value time and use it judiciously, understand the value of work and fold our sleeves and begin to work harder than other nations. We only need to become more of exporting nations than importing nations. To do that, we must build factories and companies that will help harness and process our abundant natural resources. In other words, we should produce more than we consume. It is my belief that if we follow the 5 steps discussed in this session coupled with the use of time for self-development, we will soon become the world's largest economy. In the next chapter, we shall discuss how to become wise with the use of time and how that can lead to building a first world nation. 1. God is interested in the economic growth of nations, but He, however, doesn't come down to do for humans what they should do for themselves. 2. If we fail to use our time for productive work, there will be nothing God can do to help us even if we pray non-stop for 1 whole year. 3. If we refuse to convert time into products by engaging in productive work, God will keep back His blessings to Himself. If we refuse to invest time into tilling our land, God will withhold all His provisions to Himself. 4. It is because we are a continent that detests hard work and waste time that we are still poor despite all our natural resources. 5. Any nation that understands and uses judiciously these two, wealth, time and work, will eventually become an economically prosperous nation. 6. It will be impossible for any nation to become a first world nation if it does not use its wealth of time to engage in manufacturing activities. 7. Natural resources themselves will amount to nothing if we don't work on them to process and convert them into economic gains for our nations. 8. If we are going to become a first world nation, we must build more factories than we build churches. 9. Even though God has given us abundant natural resources, we will still remain a poor continent if there are no people who are willing to invest their time into working on these resources. 10. When the citizens of a nation to whom God has given abundant resources fold their arms and refuse to invest their time to harness those resources, they deprive themselves of the benefits and blessings that are buried within those resources. 11. One secret to becoming a first world nation is for every citizen to invest in themselves and build skills, talents, competence, and creativity using the wealth of time that they have. 12. If the 18.8% of our population that are unemployed and the estimated 75 million illiterates that are idling away their time in non-productive activities actually invest that wealth of time into learning how to invent, how to start up their own businesses, and how to become skillful and competent in various aspects of life, we would quickly become a developed and a first world nation. Chapter 9. The effect of wise use of time on the economic growth of nations. Dear friends, I am delighted to welcome you to the 9th chapter of this book. The previous chapters have largely addressed the role of proper time management and work in building a first world nation. However, I will like to expose in this chapter how a wise use of time and work could be used to build an economically prosperous nation. I will like to start this chapter by first teaching about the wisdom in understanding time. The wisdom in understanding time. One of the factors that hinders the development of a nation is ignorance of what time is and how it could be used to transform a nation. Every principle of time investment and productive work that has been given in this book will yield no proportionate result in economic growth if the citizens of our nation do not first understand that the greatest wisdom that they can ever have is the understanding of time. Any nation where people are not wise in the use of time will remain poor and underdeveloped. It doesn't matter the amount of natural resources and labor force that a nation has. If that nation is grossly ignorant about the value of time, it will be difficult to bring economic growth and national development to that nation. This ignorance of the essence of time has done more harm to our nation than anything else you can think of. It has destroyed the very fiber of our nation. Why did I say so? It is because every economic setback, poverty, lack of power supply, unemployment, etc., that we face as a nation is due to the fact that our citizens haven't become wise in the use of the wealth of time. We haven't been able to build a first world nation after 57 years of independence because we lack the wisdom of how to use time to build a nation. Let's see what the Bible has to say about how to build using wisdom. Through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Proverbs chapter 24 verses 3-4 NKJV. From the verses above, you will realize that for a house to be built, wisdom is needed. It is impossible to build a house without understanding. For the purpose of this book, the word house in the scriptures above could also be called nation or country, and the word rooms called the states that make up that nation. If we replace house with nation or country and rooms with states in the above verses, it will read thus. Through wisdom a nation is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the states are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. From the foregoing, we can say that in order to make Nigeria a first-world nation, the primary virtue we need is wisdom. We can only become a developed nation through wisdom. Every state of the nation can be filled with riches, prosperity, and abundance only through knowledge and understanding. That is to say, every citizen should desperately be in search of wisdom. However, in order to have true wisdom, there is something that you and I must do. That is, we must first understand how short our life is. I would like to remind you here, that as we said earlier on in this book, time is equal to life. Hence, true wisdom is knowing how short life is. Teach us how short our life is, so that we may become wise. Psalm chapter 90 verse 12 G&T. From this verse, it is obvious that one only becomes wise when he is able to understand the brevity of her life. Hence, to have wisdom is to understand the value and brevity of time. Anyone who understands the value or worth of the wealth of time is truly a wise person. Such a person can build a nation. Any nation that has majority of its citizens possessing the wisdom that comes from a proper understanding of time will quickly be transformed into a first-world nation. That is why if Nigerians in Africa want to join the League of First World Nations, every citizen must crave wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes from a proper understanding of the wealth of time. Too many people in our country are ignorant of how time can be used to build a nation. They have no idea of how time should be used. I love the Living Bible translation of Psalms 90-12. It says, "Teach us to number our days and recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should." Psalms 90-12 TLB. It is the understanding of how short time is that determines the attitude with which we spend it. The prayer of the psalmist in this verse should be the heart cry of every Nigerian and African. We all have to learn how to spend and invest time for economic and national developmental purposes. It is this understanding of how to effectively use time that has put the first world nations ahead of us in what we should be doing now is seeking wisdom on how we can build a first world nation quicker using the wealth of time that we have. This is the true wisdom that is needed to build our nation and make it a prosperous nation. From the foregoing, we could say that any nation whose citizens do not know how to use time effectively is a nation of ignorant people. Little wonder the concept of African time is popular in Africa. It is due to our lack of wisdom and understanding of how to handle time. One consequence of our ignorance of what to do with time is underdevelopment and economic recession. This ignorance of the value of time is also the reason not too many investors are interested in investing in our nation. When investors from first world countries are looking for other countries where they could invest their wealth, they look for nations that have the wisdom and understanding of the wealth time. Because they know that if a nation can manage the wealth of time, it can manage any other wealth. They are sure that their investments will be doubled in such countries. Nobody wants to invest where his money will be lost to idleness. Nobody wants to invest in a nation where he doubts the capacity of the citizens to multiply his investment. That is why you and I must be aware that we are doing a disservice to our nation when we engage in all kind of activities that reflect our ignorance of the value of time. You and I must be aware of the negative effects of time wastage on the growth of our nation. We are still a third world nation, not because we do not have natural resources, nor because we do not have the needed labor force, but because the majority of our citizens have not cultivated the wisdom and understanding of time investment. And hence it is difficult to build a nation with people who for the most part lack the wisdom of how to use time to build a nation. In order to become an industrialized nation, we need partnership with foreign expatriates from the nations that have gone ahead of us. This will help us build large factories and build companies that are of international standards. However, the expatriates wouldn't want to come to a nation of ignorant people. No foreign company would love to do business with a country that is not wise with the use of the greatest resources, time. I know you may not have thought that ignorance of the value of time has much effect on the development of a nation. You possibly would not have imagined that if we could just overcome the African time syndrome and increase our work and labor force, we would build a first world nation. But it is true. If we display the wisdom of nation building by increasing the workforce and working hours, we will build our nation faster than we think. The reason is because through wisdom is a house built. Well, you may say that our ignorance of the value of time in Africa is just a minor thing and that we can still build a first world nation in spite of it. To say that ignorance of the value of time is a minor thing will be a display of ignorance of the huge negative effects it has on our nation's economy. A lack of wisdom in the use of time can crumble an entire nation. Ignorance of how to invest time can lead to economic recession. The wastage of time to frivolities without the knowledge of how to invest it can cause national poverty and food shortage. This lack of wisdom in the use of time slows development and regresses economic growth. Lack of wisdom destroys any nation where ignorance is allowed to flourish. One shouldn't wonder why we have all the natural resources and yet are a poor country with a high rate of out-of-school children. It is clear our ignorance of how to wisely use time to end national poverty. Why wouldn't we have close to half of our population living below the poverty line of $2 per day when there is such a high level of ignorance of the value of time in our country? If you are wondering why we are still suffering the lack of power supply after 5 decades of independence, you should know now that it is because we have not gained wisdom in the use of time. It is for the same reason that none of our refineries is functioning at full capacity and we still need to import petroleum products from other countries. There is almost no aspect of our national lives that does not suffer from the negative effect of time wastage. That is why, if we must build a first world nation, we must educate every citizen on the value of time until everyone becomes wise with the use of time. No nation can become a first world nation unless it first deals with the ignorance of the value of time. What have you noticed from the way the first world nations we've discussed in this book use time? You would probably have noticed that they are all wise nations as it regards the use of time. It is this wisdom in the use of time that is responsible for the long working hours and fewer holidays in the first world nations we discussed earlier. It is the wisdom of the use of time that is also responsible for the technologies that are invented regularly by these nations. All of these developed nations are first world nations and it is thanks to their wise application of time for productive work. On the other hand, the poor nations of the world are third world nations because they are not wise in the use of time. And without wisdom no house can be built, no nation can be built. The practice of African time in Africa, for example, is a clear proof that we are ignorant of the value of time. We lack the wisdom to invest time as we should. Little wonder we haven't been able to build a first world nation. Every African country can become a first world nation. All we need to do is to become wise, and that is simply by understanding the value of time and investing it as we ought to. Hence, if Nigeria and every other African nation desire to become first world nations, one big enemy that needs to be defeated is ignorance of the worth of time. We must cultivate zero tolerance for time wastage, invest it wisely if we are going to become a first world nation. How to use time wisely for economic diversification. If we are going to be wise in the use of time, one area we need to pay attention to is the wise use of time to build a diversified economy. I believe you are aware that Nigeria is supposedly an oil-producing nation. Our economy has been dependent on crude oil from the time it was first discovered. However, to be wise in the application of time, we need to invest time for building a diversified economy. That means we no longer need to just sit down and wait for revenues from exported crude oil, but we all need to start investing time to engage in other manufacturing activities. There is need for us to invest time into the agricultural sector again like our forefathers did before the discovery of crude oil. More so, the current economic recession requires that we diversify our economy and use most of our time to build and engage in productive activities in the various diverse economic sectors. You perhaps are aware that Nigeria was majorly an agriculturally dependent nation prior to the year 1960. Most of our parents and foreparents invested the bulk of their time doing agricultural work. However, in the later part of the year in which we gained independence, there was a shift from agriculture to crude oil and natural gas. We almost completely turned a blind eye to agricultural activities in Nigeria, that is, we ceased to invest time in agriculture. We rather chose to invest time only on the petroleum sector and import almost every other product that we consume. That was how we became an economy that has remained highly dependent on imported products from other nations for sustenance. As at the year 2017, crude oil accounts for more than 95% of exports and foreign exchange earnings, while the manufacturing sector accounts for less than 1% of total exports. There is no wisdom in that at all. It is unwise to not invest time in other aspects of the economy and just depend on crude oil exportation alone. We cannot build a first world nation that way. There is therefore a need to invest time into building a diversified economy. How can this be done? First of all, we need to invest time into studying how the first world nations built a diversified economy. Taking the United States of America as a case study, it is on record that the economy of the United States is sustained and largely driven by 5 major sectors. These are the energy sector, the manufacturing sector, the transportation sector, the healthcare sector, and the agricultural sector. Let's take the manufacturing sector for example. Statistics shows that manufacturers contribute $2.09 trillion directly to the U.S. economy, an increase from $1.73 trillion in 2009. The sector accounts for 12% of the GDP and supports 17.6 million U.S. jobs squared. Can you see how much the manufacturing sector contributes to the U.S. economy? $2.09 trillion. What then should Nigeria do to replicate similar results as the USA? We need to apply wisdom to time. It is wisdom for us to now invest time into bringing our manufacturing sector alive. Instead of wasting time to jokes, frivolities, lateness, social media, etc. Wisdom requires us to invest that time for manufacturing activities. The first thing we need to do is to set up workshops and seminars where time is invested to train our youths how to become manufacturers of various kinds of products. We are supposed to invest time teaching our youths how to manufacture steel, automobiles, aircrafts, telecommunications gadgets, chemicals, electronics, consumer goods, mining, etc. These are the major areas that Americans invest time on apart from petroleum production and the reason why they are a first world nation. Hence, to wisely use time for building a diversified economy, we must convert time into building citizens who will become experts at manufacturing steel, automobiles, aircrafts, telecommunication gadgets, chemical, electronics, consumer goods and mining products. Can you imagine if 1 million Nigerians have invested their time learning how to manufacture cars and have become experts at it? Can you imagine if another 1 million Nigerians have invested their time into learning how to manufacture steel and another 1 million how to manufacture electronics? What if another 1 million Nigerians have invested time learning how to mine gold? What do you think our economy will be like if these imaginations were true? We would have built a diversified economy, a sustainable economy, and a first world nation. So, instead of our youths roaming the streets wasting their wealth of time, they could be taught how to invest time and convert it into products that will benefit the nation at large. The ability to convert time into products is the height of wisdom. We are not truly a wise people if we don't learn to convert time into products and build our nation with it. Another area where we can apply wisdom to time in building a diversified economy is in the area of agriculture. It was reported about the USA, for example, that in a year they exported $152.5 billion worth of agricultural goods, up from $141 billion in 2013. Exports have also scaled 41% in value over the past 5 years. In 2013, 16.9 million jobs, including those on farms and in the areas of forestry and fishing, were attributed to the agriculture sector. This accounted for 9.2% of total U.S. employment. Employment in agriculture-related industries supported an additional 15.6 million jobs. This report shows that we could increase employment rate in our country, increase exportation, and double our GDP if we could invest time into building our agricultural sector and training people on how to be productive with their time in this area. If we could get 5 million Nigerian youths, for example, to just invest their time on palm oil production and exportation, and 5 million youths each to invest their time on rice production, cocoa production, yam production, coconut production, etc., we will be amazed how we would turn our economy around in the nearest future. Until we invest time on these productive activities, we are not yet a wise nation and can hardly build a first world nation. It is therefore a necessity to invest time wisely building other sectors of the economy instead of just focusing on crude oil alone and wasting the rest of the time on irrelevant activities. If we do this, we will soon become a nation that would export more, import less, have a stable economy and enjoy economic prosperity. A commitment to be wise with time. Dear friends, the growth, development, and economic stability we all crave for is in our hands. The dream of making Nigeria a first world nation is our responsibility to make come true. All we need to do now is to make a commitment to be wise with time. It is possible to build a first world nation if you and I will resolve to do our part by making sure we stop wasting time and rather investing it wisely for productive endeavors. If we all would make a commitment to not partake in any time-wasting activity and to teach our children and fellow citizens to do same, we would soon eradicate laziness and poverty from our nation before we know it. It is our collective responsibility to make Nigeria a first world nation. It is our duty to make every African country a first world country. With our cooperative effort, we can kick out time wastage from Nigeria and from Africa as a whole. We must not let African time syndrome truncate the destiny of our nation. There is no wisdom in that at all. True wisdom is in knowing the value of time and using it productively to build a nation. How we can invest time for hard work in building a world-class nation must become the concern of every citizen. Our churches and mosques have a role to play in helping people learn the need for making a commitment to wisely use time for only productive activities. These religious institutions are for the most part the ones responsible for building the value systems that are prevalent in our nation. Hence, our pastors must teach their members that they need to make a commitment to themselves and to the nation that they will not destroy the economy of the nation by wasting time on lateness, social media, joking and other non-productive activities. Our clergymen are supposed to tell their adherents that not only is time wastage a sin against the nation, but also an act of foolishness. They should be made to understand that it is wisdom to invest time productively, as the verses we read earlier states. Teach us to number our days and recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. Psalms 90-12 TLB. The scripture above encourages every one of us to learn to recognize the value and urgency of time and then to spend it wisely. It says you and I should desist from wasting time but rather engage in productive work. If every citizen makes a personal commitment to use time wisely, we would have a nation full of inventors, manufacturers, professionals, medical specialists, and prosperous people. It is my belief that when the majority of us commit to use our wealth of time to engage in productive labor, we will become a productive nation. One with a large and stable economy. However, if we don't all make a commitment to use time wisely, our manufacturing sector will remain domicile, our natural resources will remain untapped and our economy will keep sliding downwards. Anytime we choose rather to waste time than use it wisely, we are indirectly truncating our own economic growth and national development. We would remain poor and underdeveloped if this call to make a commitment to use time wisely is not taken seriously. Any nation without a commitment to the wise use of time cannot end poverty and economic recession. Any country with a loose attitude to time cannot be economically competitive. The first step to building a first world nation is to make every citizen see time as an instrument of national transformation, and then secondly to commit to use time mainly for productive activities. As I bring this chapter to a close, I will like to remind you that there is a possibility of making Nigeria and Africa the envy of the world. We can build a first world nation and an economically prosperous nation. All we need to do is to become wise with the use of time and use it only for productive work and for building the nation of our dream. 1. One of the factors that hinders the development of a nation is ignorance of what time is and how it could be used to transform a nation. 2. Any nation where people are not wise in the use of time will remain poor and underdeveloped. 3. It doesn't matter the amount of natural resources and labor force that a nation has. If that nation is grossly ignorant about the value of time, it will be difficult to bring economic growth and national development to that nation. 4. Every economic setback, poverty, lack of power supply, unemployment, etc., that we face as a nation is due to the fact that our citizens haven't become wise in the use of the wealth of time. 5. One only becomes wise when he is able to understand the brevity of his/her life. Hence, to have wisdom is to understand the value and brevity of time. 6. Any nation that has majority of its citizens possessing the wisdom that comes from a proper understanding of time will quickly be transformed into a first world nation. 7. It is the understanding of how short time is that determines the attitude with which we spend it. 8. Any nation whose citizens do not know how to use time effectively is a nation of ignorant people. 9. If we could just overcome the African time syndrome and increase our work and labor force, we would build a first world nation. 10. The practice of African time in Africa is a clear proof that we are ignorant of the value of time. 11. We are not truly a wise people if we don't learn to convert time into products and build our nation with it. Chapter 10. The Strategy to Becoming a First World Nation. Dear friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the final chapter of this book. The preceding chapters have explained how time and its wise usage for work can lead a nation to becoming a first world nation. We started this book by discussing the wealth of time and how every nation is equally wealthy because of the equal gift of time that they all have. It was stated that this wealth of time is of more value than mineral resources and that it is equal only to life. The next chapter explained the destructive effect the lack of understanding of the value of time has on the African continent. It was stated that the culture of time wastage in Africa, which is called African time, has led to the destruction of our economic and developmental growth as individual nations and as a continent. The chapter that followed discussed how Nigeria and Africa can double her GDP just by developing a culture that encourages a more judicious use of time as opposed to the time-wasting culture that currently prevails in our nation. It was stated that an increase in the number of time that is used for productive work will lead to an increase in gross domestic product of our nations. Furthermore, we saw how time can be used for human capital development and the role of the educational sector in bringing that to pass. The fifth chapter of this book stated that time is either wasted, spent or invested in that to build a first world nation. Every citizen must learn to invest time instead of just waste or spend it. The following chapter discussed how religion leads to time wastage and economic backwardness. The chapter encourages every citizen to downplay religion and use their time instead for more productive activities that will add to the GDP and economic prosperity of the nation. The following chapters discussed how developed nations use time and what Africa should learn from them. how to become an economically competitive nation using the wealth of time, and how a wise use of time can turn Nigeria and all other African countries into first world nations. Having said all that, I am going to use this final chapter to suggest a few strategies that, if properly followed, could make Nigeria and every African country first world nations. This chapter also explains that the time is ripe for Africa to take the challenge of leading the rest of the world. It's Africa's turn to lead the world. It is an obvious reality that as at today, Africa is the least developed amongst the continents of the world. She is also the poorest continent, not in terms of natural resources but in terms of GDP and economic prosperity. Africa is the most backward of the continents in terms of infrastructure and social amenities. It is no secret that we are the most exploited and the most oppressed continent in the world. Amidst all of the above-mentioned negatives, I still see light at the end of the tunnel for Africa. I say this because a careful study of history and the Bible has shown that God knows the end from beginning. He is the God of time and seasons. However, He lives outside of time. He is not only the God of time and seasons but also the God to the nations of the earth, of which Nigeria and Africa is part. He rules in the affairs of men and over every nation on the face of the earth. The scripture in Psalms 22:27-28 says, "The whole earth shall see it and return to the Lord, the people of every nation shall worship Him. For the Lord is King and rules the nations." Psalms 22:27-28. Being God over the nations, He changes times and seasons. A look at certain world events in history makes me believe that it is time for Africa's story to change. History has shown that there is a time and purpose for every nation and continent. There are some nations that are regarded as first world nations today but which were third world nations some few decades ago. They had their times of poverty, war, illiteracy, underdevelopment and low GDP. However, when their time came, they climbed the ladder of greatness to join the nations that had gone ahead of them. And today they are called developed nations. It is also true that there were some nations that were regarded as great nations some decades ago but which unfortunately fell off the ladder of greatness and are nowhere to be found among the list of first world nations today. I therefore wish to say that we should not be discouraged about the current state of things in Africa. It won't always remain like this. We've had our bad times, we shall also have our good time, and the time is upon us already. We must not miss our chance. I don't want to miss out on the chance of having a good time. Victor Webster. Those who are students of the Bible would be very well familiar with the passage of scriptures that says the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Standing on this line of scriptures, I would invite you to believe with me that each continent's time comes and that it is Africa's turn to lead the world. History tells us that every continent has had their chance. It is Africa's chance now. It is time for Africa to arise and lead the world. That is why I have written this book, to call on every African nation and to show them the way to becoming a first world nation. It has always been my belief that God has a plan and a purpose for every continent just as He has for every nation and every individual. He also has a time limit for the accomplishment of His plans and purposes for every continent. God, however, will not come down to build and develop Africa. He can only show us the plan and the purpose. It behoves on us to strategize and build our continent by ourselves. That is why I am calling on my fellow Africans to arise and build. It is our time to build a continent in which all the constituent nations will be called first world nations. However, for that to happen, there are certain strategies we perhaps need to pay attention to and invest time on. The economic strategy. Dear friends, one of the strategies, and perhaps the most important one for building a first world nation, is that of economics. You and I know that our nation has been suffering economic poverty since recent years. We are currently in an economic recession. There is an increased number of out-of-school children for financial reasons. There is a hike in the prices of goods and services. There is a large number of our population who are unemployed and hence, an increased crime rate. There is severe food shortage and starvation in the land. Until we solve these problems and more, we would not be able to build a first world nation. That is why there has to be an economic strategy. Everyone is just complaining and lamenting the state of things without giving practical steps to changing the course of things. No one seems to have the know-how to bring Nigeria out of the pit of economic poverty. Or should I say, those who know do not want to bring forth their ideas, probably waiting to be voted into government office first. It is for this reason that I have written this book, to proffer solutions that, if strictly followed, would go a long way to change the story of Nigeria and Africa for good. So, what is the economic strategy for turning a nation into a first world nation? It is simple. It has to do with investing more time into economic activities. That is to say, investing more time into productive activities. This will require a lot of productive work. To revamp the Nigerian economy, we must start with cultivating the right attitude to work. Every citizen must be taught how to use time for productive work. Without a working and highly productive populace, no nation can build her economy. The Nigerian economic problem can be solved when all hands get busy with productive work instead of wasting time to vanity and on frivolities. Everyone must take responsibility for the economic growth of his nation. I explained earlier in the previous chapters that the GDP of any nation depends to a large extent on how well the citizens of that nation engage in productive work using the wealth of time that they have. Hence, there is an urgent need to get everybody to work and to understand the importance of time and work. Never again should people be allowed to waste time on frivolities that have no economic value. There is no better way to build a nation's economy than for the citizens of that nation to use time for productive work. Hard work that leads to productivity is the best way to revitalize any economy. Nothing else can take its place. There is no substitute for hard work. Thomas Edison. Have you ever wondered why most African nations are poor? Has it crossed your mind why some nations are prospering while others are struggling with recession? In my opinion, one of the reasons for recession in any nation is laziness. That means whenever the citizens of any nation have a loose attitude to time and refuse to work, that nation becomes an economically poor nation. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 verse 18 say that, because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hands the house leaks. NKJV. This means that economic decay comes to any nation that encourages laziness. Any society where hard work and a judicious use of time is not emphasized will sooner or later become a poor society. That has been the major problem with Africa. But if we must build first world nations, we must pay attention to the economy, and the best way to do that is by teaching people how to use time for the kind of work that leads to productivity and economic growth. Any slothful society will come to decay sooner or later. I always say that in one way or the other, decay will come to the economy, the industrial sector, the housing sector, ministries, private and public agencies, institutions and everything else in a nation if the citizens refuse to work hard. Laziness brings decay, corruption and a bad economy. The second part of the scripture we read earlier says, and through the idleness of hands the house leaks. What does it mean to be idle? It means to waste time doing nothing. That is, the resources of a nation will leak whenever its citizens waste time doing nothing productive. There is going to be brain drain, economic drain and all kinds of drainage will be going on in the society or country where the culture of idleness is prevalent. So, for any country to develop, it has to first of all overcome the culture of time wastage in its citizens by teaching them to use time for work and for economic processes. It doesn't matter how many presidents come and go out of office, until a practical economic strategy is adopted, our natural resources will decay, leak and produce no economic profit for us. Therefore, for Nigeria and Africa to grow economically, there must be a campaign against laziness and time wastage. Every developed country has an addiction to work. They have a system that makes it obligatory for the citizens to invest time in work. That is the strategy we need to adopt to make Africa the envy of the world. To salvage our economy, we must first teach our people the importance of time and secondly teach them the importance of hard work. We must raise a campaign against the use of time for frivolities and irrelevant activities that do not add value to the citizens nor the nation as a whole. We must raise a campaign against laziness and wastage of time. People must be taught that it is better to use time for work than to waste it at the cinema. It is better to be at the industry working than to go watch football at the sports center. All non-productive activities must be brought to a halt if we desire to see our nation's economy revive again. The industrial strategy. If you go back to 1800, everybody was poor. I mean everybody. The Industrial Revolution kicked in, and a lot of countries benefited, but by no means everyone. Bill Gates. One of the hallmarks of the Industrial Revolution was the use of mechanized means of production. From farming, to automobile industry, to road and railway construction, there was an increased use of machines as opposed to the use of manual means of production. This led to an increase in productivity within a minimized time. Before the Industrial Revolution began in the 1800s, the nations of the world were almost entirely poor nations when compared to today. It was thanks to industrialization that nations like United Kingdom, USA, etc. became economically powerful nations. The reason is because the more productive a nation becomes with its wealth of time, the more products it will produce and the more products it will export. When a nation exports more than it imports, that nation will most likely become an economically rich nation. Nations are prosperous thanks to industrialization. Nations become economically competitive when they are able to industrialize every sector of the economy. Nations become rich by industrialization. Therefore, if nations like Nigeria and all other African nations desire to be economically wealthy nations, they must of necessity build industries and do so at a speedy rate. There is no way we can become first world nations without industrialization. Instead of spending time building churches, let's invest time building factories. Instead of building mosques, let's build manufacturing industries. We said in previous chapters that Africa is richly blessed with a wide variety of natural resources. Can you imagine if we build large numbers of manufacturing industries to process each one of our natural resources? How rich we would become in our GDP and how economically competitive we would be. This in turn will lead to a high rate of employment, work and productivity. That was what made America the great nation that many admire today. During the industrial era in America, Henry Ford built an automobile company that was manufacturing cars. 4 cars were produced every minute, 240 per hour, nearly 6,000 per day. The country was paving roads and building bridges. More cars were creating more jobs even in the steel, glass and rubber manufacturing companies. Detroit was booming. People were coming from across the continent, and even as far away as Ukraine. Ford was the most important man in the most important industry in the most important economy in the world. 1. From the above example, you will notice that industrialization led to increased work, better time investment, increased productivity, more money for the economy and influx of foreign investors and businessmen. That means that if Nigeria could build more industries and factories, we could actually increase our oil production, our cement production, our palm oil production, our steel production and so on and forth. An increase in industrialization will lead to an increase in cocoa production, cassava processing, rice production and an increase in the production of any kind of food and cash crops. Our country has been blessed with gold, aluminum, copper, tin, iron, etc. But we have failed to become world's largest exporter of these minerals for the singular reason that we have failed to become an industrialized nation. Thanks to the above reason, we are an economically recessed nation. To become an economically competitive nation and a first world nation, we must first become an industrialized nation. The power of diaspora. A lot has been said in previous sessions about how to make Nigeria and every African nation first world nations. I want to say here that in addition to a productive use of time, an increased work capacity and all other strategies we've discussed in this book, if we manage to harness the potential of our diaspora, Nigeria would indeed become a developed and world-class nation. Why did I say this? It is because the diaspora Nigerians actually have a major role to play in the development of their country. They have seen how time is respected and invested in other countries. They have seen the work ethics of the Europeans and the Americans. It behoves on them now to return home to teach other Nigerians how proper use of time can be used to turn a nation into a first-world nation. It is common knowledge that there are many Nigerians who left the shores of our country many years ago to go study abroad in various fields of endeavors. Some went to the United States of America, others to the United Kingdom, some others to Germany, Canada, China, Norway, Denmark, Singapore, etc. There is almost no country in the world where Nigerians will not be found today with highly professional skills. Some of these Nigerians have become renowned neurosurgeons and doctors of various specialization in the United States of America, in Canada and the UK. Others have become engineers, bankers, economic strategists, accountants, ministers, scientists, information technologists, etc. in various countries of the world. They have got many years of working experience, they have the wealth and the know-how to build a nation. They have imbibed the work and time investment culture of the first world nations. Unfortunately, they are serving other nations with their expertise and knowledge while their fatherland, Nigeria, is suffering economic recession, poverty, lack of power supply, security challenges, etc. For most of these professionals, they perhaps have either completely forgotten about their country or have given up on it. Some others sincerely want to go back home to Nigeria to contribute their quota to the building of the nation. However, the conditions back home perhaps have not been favorable for them to return. Whatever the case may be, it is my belief that Nigerians in diaspora have a big role to play in turning Nigeria from a third world to a first world nation. It is because of the above stated reasons that I am calling on all Nigerians in the diaspora to look upon the current state of their nation of origin and with faith and unreserved commitment make a decision to return home to build and to develop Nigeria. If you are a Nigerian in diaspora reading this book, I invite you to bring your professional expertise, skills, knowledge and wealth to contribute to the building of our great nation Nigeria. We need better hospitals, better schools, better road networks, new factories, technological companies, industries, small and large-scale businesses. We need a stable economy, functional economic policies, functional refineries, mechanized agricultural systems, good drainage, abundant food and prosperity for all citizens. It is possible to enjoy all of these in Nigeria. If all of us in diaspora return home to build factories, small and medium-scale businesses, schools, hospitals, etc., we would cause an industrial revolution in the nation. Currently, only Aliko Dangote and a few other Nigerians are working hard to build factories and industrialize Nigeria. But we need more people, and that is why the role of the diaspora cannot be overlooked. I believe that every street in Nigeria can be littered with industries, businesses and factories. I believe that most of the products we import from other countries can be produced in Nigeria if our sons and daughters come home with their expertise, skills and technological know-hows. I believe that we can raise more industrialists, we can boost our private sector and we can build a world-class economy. What we need to do is to simply harness the power of our diasporas and form a synergy between already existing businesses and the large number of businesses that we can build when our sons and daughters return home. Just imagine, for instance, that 10,000 Nigerians in diaspora return home to build factories and businesses in every state of the Federation where time is efficiently converted into products and services. What do you think will happen to our productivity as a nation? What do you think will happen to the problem of unemployment? What about our GDP and Human Development Index? Millions of people will be employed, our productivity will increase, our GDP will increase and more people will be able to come out of poverty and economic lack. I believe that if we all come together in unity and unrelenting commitment, we can turn Nigeria from a developing nation to a first world nation. I will not fail to also call on the federal government of Nigeria to create an enabling environment that will entice fascinate and encourage all sons and daughters of Nigeria abroad to return home to contribute their quota to the building of a first world nation. I believe that if we do this, we will soon have a nation that we will be proud to call our own. 1. Without a working and highly productive populace, no nation can build her economy. 2. The Nigerian economic problem can be solved when all hands get busy with productive work instead of wasting time to vanity and on frivolities. 3. There is no better way to build a nation's economy than for the citizens of that nation to use time for productive work. Hard work that leads to productivity is the best way to revitalize any economy. 4. Whenever the citizens of any nation have a loose attitude to time and refuse to work, that nation becomes an economically poor nation. 5. Economic decay comes to any nation that encourages laziness. Any society where hard work and a judicious use of time is not emphasized will sooner or later become a poor society. 6. If we must build first world nations, we must pay attention to the economy, and the best way to do that is by teaching people how to use time for the kind of work that leads to productivity and economic growth. 7. There is going to be brain drain, economic drain, and all kinds of drainage will be going on in the society or country where the culture of idleness is prevalent. 8. For any country to develop, it has to first of all overcome the culture of time wastage in its citizens by teaching them to use time for work and for economic processes. 9. For Nigeria and Africa to grow economically, there must be a campaign against laziness and time wastage. 10. The more productive a nation becomes with its wealth of time, the more products it will produce and the more products it will export. 11. Instead of spending time building churches, let's invest time building factories. Instead of building mosques, let's build manufacturing industries. 12. To become an economically competitive nation and a first world nation, we must first become an industrialized nation. Conclusion. Dear friends, what I have been trying to say from the beginning of this book is this: we must all lay a demand on our time, every second and minute of the day, and convert it into valuable products as much as we can. My intention in this book has been to open the eyes of my fellow Africans and Nigerians, in particular to the fact that our GDP could be doubled in a very short time, if only we recognize this singular factor of the value of time and take advantage of it. Time indeed is the greatest wealth, and if well harnessed can turn every nation in our continent into a first world nation. I believe that having read this book, you will resolve to never waste time again on non-productive activities. I do hope you will resolve to do away with the culture of African time and rather begin to respect time and use it for productive work like the citizens of first world nations do. It is also my prayer that Nigeria, Africa, and all other underdeveloped nations will apply the principles that are in this book and use them to elevate their nations from third world to first world countries. For the Love of God, Church and Nation, by Pastor Sunday Adelia. 1. For more information on the definition of the term first world nation, see the first world country, this URL. 2. How Nigeria can double her GDP, this URL.